Alright, hi, my name is Josiah and before I begin, I would like to ask you all a question. Raise your hand if you have ever played the board game Monopoly before. Okay, so most of us here. As you know, the objective of the game is to purchase as much of the property as you can so you can eventually collect all the other money from the other players. And while this is great for the person who collects all the monopolies, for everyone else, it's a dangerous and costly road to bankruptcy. So for my speech, my major claim is that the Disney purchase of the 21st Century Fox's film and TV assets is a dangerous monopoly. The secondary claims I'll be making to further this is, one, the purchase makes the threat of media consolidation even worse, and two, previously Fox-owned movies and shows will be like Disney-fied or given the Disney treatment in a way. So bearing that in mind, the first secondary claim, which is the media consolidation. Now you might ask yourself, what is so bad about a company gaining monopolistic power? And to answer that question, this quote from Mark Thorma from CBS News might give you a better understanding. He states, when firms have such power, they charge prices that are higher than can be justified based upon the cost of production. Prices that are higher than they would be if the market was more competitive. So essentially what Mark is saying is, when companies have no other competition, they can charge more for a product without fear of consumers being able to buy that same product from someone else at a more affordable price. So one such consumer impact that I believe could result from Disney increasing its ever-growing collection is the potential rise in ticket prices at the theaters. This past December saw the release of Star Wars: The Last Jedi, and the contract theaters had to agree to be able to show the film was that they had to give Disney 65% of the ticket revenue, as well as keep the film in their biggest theaters for 4 weeks. Now, while that is not a ridiculous deal, as 2015's Star Wars: The Force Awakens had a very similar one with, instead of 65, it was 64% going to Disney. Instead of 4 weeks, it was 2 weeks in their biggest theaters. The new deal had a bit of a strange clause in it that if any theater broke that 4-week agreement, they would have to give Disney an extra 5%, which would mean they would be giving Disney 70% of the ticket revenue, which is quite extreme, especially when compared to the studio average, which is around 40 to 55% of ticket sales. Now, while this currently might not sound like an issue, given their collection growing even more and more, it could get even worse, as Scott Mendelson of Forbes.com points out in an article this past December. He wrote, last year, Walt Disney had a jaw-dropping 26% of the domestic box office, and while Fox had 13%. With Fox and Disney combined into one entity, it's plausible to see Walt Disney's theatrical output controlling close to 40% of the theatrical business. With that kind of hold, the Mouse House could essentially rewrite how its movies are seen in theaters. So with that type of control, that can inevitably lead to theaters having to raise ticket prices to compensate for the higher percentages that Disney demands back for their films, thus forcing everyone to potentially pay more when they go out to see a movie. Now, for the second claim of the previously Fox-owned movies and shows being Disney-fied, is that Disney's target audience, historically speaking, has always skewed to young kids and families. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with this, it prevents them from taking risks on films because they fear it could potentially tarnish this carefully crafted reputation. Instead of making films for an older audience, they stick to ones that get the standard G, PG, or PG-13 rating. However, on the other hand, Fox has always been willing to, for better or worse, to take risks and try ideas more suited for an older and more mature audience. A clear example of this is two of their most recent superhero films, and highly successful ones at that, Deadpool and Logan, with both of these films receiving an R rating. These two films in particular were able to make movies that did a great job of bringing their star characters to life because they were not held back by trying to keep it below a certain rating. And both movies were critically acclaimed and were big box office successes because of it. If these properties were under the control of Disney, it is very likely, however, that they would have not ventured out of their comfort zone, as their company has never directly made a R-rated movie in their history. So inclusion, while many of the fans of the Marvel superhero movies are excited about the X-Men and Fantastic Four being able to potentially be a part of the cinematic universe that Marvel and Disney has carefully crafted, and the idea that the Avengers and the X-Men could potentially go out for some shawarma together is certainly an appealing and potentially humorous one. I do not think it is worth the overwhelming amount of control that it would give to one company over the entire film and TV industry, and that the repercussions that could come from such an acquisition, like Disney purchasing Fox's TV and film assets, would get them.
All right, there's several things that I think are pretty solid in the speech. One or two things that could be worked on a little bit more. The proposition is clearly identified at the beginning of the speech. I appreciate that. I like the little analogy that you used of monopoly at the beginning to get our attention. There's a preview of what the secondary points are going to be. There are only two of those supporting points, so it's not that complicated to follow the argument, although I do think there needs to be a little bit of development of each of those individual points so that they are more convincing. You definitely identify what those points are. In the body of the speech, you signpost them as you get to them. The issue of media consolidation and the relationship to price. Well, the price issue is basically explained with some generic information about how monopolies work. The Disney information about their contracts, I think that's also interesting, and the reason that they're able to leverage those kinds of contracts have to do with the product that they're putting out. The question about whether or not they could get those kinds of deals with product that is untested or simply because they are the big dog in the room, that's a slightly different issue. When you've got a product like that is in such high demand like the Star Wars movies are, you're going to ask for the best results that you can get. I'm not sure that Disney's getting those results because they're so big. It's because it may very well be because they have the product that the theaters want to have. So your suggestion, though, is that because of the consolidation, that there's going to be fewer choices, and that's where I think you need to build the argument a little bit more. The best piece of information that you had in the speech that demonstrates this is the evidence from the one guy in Forbes that says Disney had 26% of the box office, Fox had 13% of the box office, so that's a combined 40% of the box office, assuming that they remained relatively stable. That's a big chunk of the business that's going on. We should get some technical definitions that describe what constitutes a monopoly here. There ought to be some legal terminology here that describes this. When does the government step in on those kinds of things? Do they see a monopoly at that level of control of the business, or does it have to be higher? And there needs to be, I think, a little bit of an examination of what the competitors are capable of doing, and there's not really much discussion of that. So I think that you've got a good argument here. I think it's relatively clear, and I like the information that you've got. There's just a little bit more to do on that. The second argument, I think, is a little bit more problematic because the assumption that Disney is going to Disneyfy films, it's definitely Disney Studios itself puts out a particular brand of film. I think most people understand that. You don't have to provide a lot of premises on that. You did have kind of a qualifier in your claim that says, they've never made on their own an R-rated film. that may be true, but they have owned several companies, just like they're about to own Fox, that have put out R-rated films, and that's going to be, probably an area of weakness that the opponent's going to be able to exploit. I mean, let's face it, Disney owned Miramax at one point, and Miramax put out some of the most violent, sexualized, and vulgar films you can possibly imagine, and that had nothing to do with Harvey Weinstein. I said Harvey Firestein, wrong Harvey. Harvey Weinstein. It had to do with, working with Quentin Tarantino, and let's face it, Disney was basically they owned the company that's putting those films out, but they didn't have their name on any of that stuff. So the question would be, would they continue to let Fox produce on their own and merely oversee it, or are they going to take control over it? Your argument is that they're likely to take control over it for a couple of reasons. One is they want to consolidate the MCU thing, so that's something that would make us freak out about this, because Disney's trying to integrate this more, and if they want to do that, that means these other films, these outliers that you're talking about that have been successful, would be vulnerable. That's, I think, a good argument to make, and you kind of partially make that argument with the examples that you point to. But everything else, I think, kind of falls outside of that, and you need to give us a reason why Disney would say, well, this company has been making these kinds of films that have been substantially successful, and we're either going to not make them, or we're going to make them the Disney way. Why would they need to do that and own the studio? They could have made those films the way they wanted to make them in the first place. The answer is, are they eliminating their competition because there's a problem there? That's definitely something that would be monopolistic. In other words, if your goal here is to remove your competition and prevent their product from being competitive with your product, that's something that is a little bit problematic. Finding proof of that is harder in this argument. I appreciated the joke about the X-Men and the Avengers having shawarma together. I thought that was pretty amusing. Thank you.